Spider-Man Brand New Day is going to adapt at least 4 villains from Spider-Man's extensive rogues gallery that have yet to be adapted to live action. Which begs the question, who's left?
I chose my path, you chose the way of the hero. And they found you amusing for a while. But the one thing they love more than a hero is to see a hero fail, fall, die trying. In spite of everything you've done for them, eventually they will hate you.
Brand New Day is going to feature Scorpion, long after being set up originally in Spider-Man Homecoming, back in 2017, which was almost 9 years ago? Wow. It's also going to bring in Boomerang, Tarantula, and Tombstone. I think Tombstone is the one I'm most eager to see out of all those. It's also rumored that other B-listers may show up across the course of the film, in brief cameos at the very least. This makes Tom Holland's Spider-Man the most prolific Spider-Man in terms of sheer quantity of villains, confronted or bested. Over 25 years, Sony Pictures brought to live action multiple Green Goblins, Doc Ock, Sandman, Venom twice, the Lizard, Electro, Rhino also twice.
Don't you want to know why they call me the Rhino?
Vulture, Shocker, the Tinkerer, Mysterio, Morbius, Carnage, Shriek, Null, Ezekiel Sims, Kraven the Hunter, and Chameleon. Oh yeah, I bet you forgot Chameleon was in live action. Don't worry, I didn't. We're also getting Spider-Man Noir, which will feature Silvermane and Black Cat. Felicia Hardy also appeared previously in Spider-Man 2, or at least The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Oh, and Kingpin has appeared a lot, as has the Punisher, and both of which started off as Spider-Man villains. Yes, the Punisher too. There's frankly a massive number of Spider-Man villains. I'd argue Spider-Man has a more diverse population of villains adapted to live action than Batman has at this point. I mean, it also helps that Batman always repeats the same villains over and over again, especially Joker. I mean, think about it. We're getting Boomerang before we get Clayface. Think about that for a second. You might even be under the impression that Spider-Man has outright run out of villains to adapt. You're wrong. In part because comic artists and writers have come up with a bunch of bad guys who fall through the cracks over the years, but also because Spider-Man has so many good villains, there are a ton that just haven't been adapted yet. Not only have many of the villains not been done justice enough, I'd argue, but we're actually just scratching the surface of who's left. There are several iconic Spider-Man villains lurking in the wings for Tom Holland's Spider-Man, or future Spider-Man, to face in future installments. But before we dive into this topic any further, I need to point out something Spider-Man has in this upcoming film. A secret identity, maintained behind his mask and a little bit of magic defense. But when you're online, tons of people know everything you're doing. I'm sure you'd be embarrassed if someone, say, looked at your internet browsing history right now and saw that on that second screen you're using to watch this video that you're looking at. I'm not judging, it's just the interesting choice is all. But even joking aside, someone can always access your internet stuff and find out way worse stuff you're looking at on your computer. Your internet service provider can access everything you look up online, and even sell your browsing history to ad companies. It's easily accessible, and quite frankly, wouldn't you rather not have your private information out there as a product to sell? That's where today's sponsor, ExpressVPN, comes in. ExpressVPN shields your online activity from your ISP and other parties trying to spy on your internet history by encrypting and rerouting 100% of network traffic through secure servers. This means internet providers can't log your activity and then sell it. On top of that, ExpressVPN protects you from hackers and data thieves. Actually, what's really cool is that ExpressVPN can actually let you unblock content from around the world, meaning material that is blocked normally by your location is now totally accessible. ExpressVPN can let you change your online location, changing your IP address to any other country around. Are you interested? Find out how you can get up to 4 months extra by clicking the link in the description below, scanning the QR code, or by going to expressvpn.com/Gramulia. That's expressvpn.com/Gramulia. Link is in the description or on screen right now in the QR code. And now, back to your regularly scheduled material and wall crawling. Before we dive into this into any detail, I do want to give a special shout out to Black Cat, who as of yet, despite appearing in Spider-Noir and has appeared in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, we've never seen Felicia Hardy cross paths with Peter Parker. And that's wrong. Black Cat in many ways is Spidey's Catwoman. While they're rarely fighting each other, Felicia is an essential part of Peter's cast of characters, and should appear, undeniably, preferably, alongside Peter when he gets the black suit, which we know is coming. This is what we saw in Spectacular Spider-Man, where Black Cat almost formed a sort of temptation role for Peter at this point in the game.
Are we going to be bad guys together, partner? Or just plain bad?
I like the idea of the temptation of powers without responsibilities, and that might suit well with the themes usually presented alongside the Black Symbiote suit storyline. And also, in the comics, Felicia appeared during the Black Suit era. Specifically, Felicia liked Peter in black so much, she actually created a fabric version of the black suit. Two other pseudo-enemies I think should be adapted as well are the Prowler and Cardiac. Yes, I know we see Aaron Davis, as played by Donald Glover, in Spider-Man Homecoming, but he's not the Prowler there, he's just Aaron Davis. We're probably going to see him adapted eventually when Miles Morales is brought into the MCU. But don't sleep on Hobie Brown, who you might know better as Spider-Punk in Across the Spider-Verse. Hobie is essentially a character driven to crime to survive, but he later becomes a loyal friend and ally to Spider-Man. That being said though, Cardiac is also a character driven to crime by outside circumstances, but I personally think Cardiac is way more interesting and sympathetic to audiences. And the circumstances that lead him to crime are very different from either Prowler. Cardiac's brother dies of an incurable disease, and so he devotes his life to studying medicine and building opportunities for people to have medical resources given to them. But after he becomes successful, he learns that there is a drug that was developed that could have saved his brother's life that was developed decades ago. But the company that made that drug realized they'd have more profits by treating the ailment rather than curing it. Meaning, they could have cured his brother, they just chose not to. And so Cardiac embeds vibranium mesh under his skin and turns his heart into a reactor in order to go out and slaughter those at the top of the industrial platform who derive wealth from the pain of others. Tell me that's not one of the coolest villains no one talks about. Cardiac is criminally underused, frankly. Of course, there's also Cloak and Dagger, who have been adapted to the MCU, have been referenced since their series, but have yet to really appear anywhere else tangibly. They become more popular with Marvel rivals, kind of elevating their status, but they originally started as Spider-Man, not necessarily villains, but minor antagonists who became close friends, much like the Prowler and Cardiac. So I think they should also appear somewhere in this discussion. But let's put our focus more on villains for a bit first. Before we get started on the unused, let's first look at the villains who've been locked into Sony's extended Spider-Man universe without Spider-Man. The characters who Peter Parker has yet to actually confront, but have been adapted. Let's try to ignore Venom and Rhino, because prior iterations of Spider-Man fought Venom and Rhino, and they'll probably appear in the MCU at some point in the future. Now, Morbius, Null, Carnage, Shriek, Ezekiel Sims, Kraven, and Chameleon. Of these 7 characters who appeared in the Sony Pictures whatever, I feel the one with the most potential is Kraven the Hunter. Kraven is one of Spider-Man's greatest enemies, for a very good reason. He might not have superpowers, but he's clever. He's a hunter. He can't punch Spidey in the face very hard, but he can come up with a strategy to ensnare Spider-Man very successfully. He's able to outlast and out-hunt Spider-Man, exploiting his skills and abilities to properly maneuver around the web-slinger. Very famously, in Kraven's Last Hunt, one of the best Spider-Man stories, period, by the way, he manages to completely subdue Peter using nothing more than a few cleverly placed traps and tranquilizer. And then he buries Spider-Man alive and becomes Spider-Man, truly besting him by taking over the spider from inside out. I think the Kraven film that came out a while back honestly had potential to be halfway decent, but because it's Sony and they take the most boring approach with all their characters in all instances, they mungled it up. They tried making him a hero rather than a hunter. In Kraven's Last Hunt, Kraven hunts vermin, a character named Vermin, not the concept of rats, while impersonating Spider-Man. In Insomniac's Spider-Man 2, Kraven is introduced hunting the bulk of Peter's rogues gallery and besting them in combat, to the death. I think a story involving Kraven hunting Spider-Man and possibly one of Spidey's more reluctant villains would be fascinating. A villain like, say, the Lizard, who transforms against his will, or Vermin again. Someone like that would be very interesting to see Kraven hunt, and Spidey have to kind of stop Kraven from killing while Spidey tries saving said villain. Kind of like what we see in No Way Home. And if you get Kraven, you also gotta get his brother, the Chameleon, who is another underutilized villain, in part because, well, he's mainly a master of disguise. And Mysterio has disguises all figured out. He's the disguise guy, he's the illusionist. So what does the Chameleon bring to the table? Well, he brings around spying. He's more of a stealthy character who can get around easily. Impersonations, which are a little easier to manage than giant theatrics. Chameleon is a smaller character, not necessarily in terms of appearances, but in terms of power sets. And so he's not really a good frontrunner villain, but he's a great guy on the side who can manipulate and maneuver things for you. So while he can't headline a movie, he can be a good henchman. And of course, there is that storyline where he did help, create robots to impersonate Peter's parents, to humiliate him as a part of Harry Osborn's big schemes. That's cool too, I guess. Which means you can use Chameleon in multiple different movies as kind of a henchman. Especially if, in one movie, Kraven is beaten, and next movie, Chameleon gets revenge working with the next guy, the next villain,
Let there be carnage.
Carnage, and by extension Shriek, I feel were really underutilized in Venom Let There Be Carnage. Great design, great depictions of both of their power sets, and there are some moments where, when Carnage is allowed to go all out, he's fantastic. However, no adaptation of Carnage has ever really been good. I would say none. Not even the 90s cartoon that everyone loves. No, not even that one. This is entirely due to how so few of these adaptations have the leeway to allow Carnage to be as unhinged and nightmarish as he is originally. Carnage is often called a Joker copy by some of his critics, but I think they're wrong. You see, Joker has style. Joker often has intention, strategy, focus. He's playing a game that Carnage simply isn't. Carnage and Cletus Cassidy, when not part of a Null cult or a Dormammu cult like in the 90s cartoon, have one goal: nothing. Carnage is a complete nihilist who revels in destruction and suffering. He believes that nothing has value, and so the ultimate expression of freedom is raw violence. He can feel affection, he can feel love, but that's secondary to his urge to destroy and ruin. Carnage is a dark shadow to Venom, who is himself Spidey's dark shadow. Venom started as a reaction to Spider-Man's actions. Spidey, even when doing everything right, will sometimes hurt someone or cause someone suffering. And those hurt people can stew in their pain and become worse. Carnage is that for Venom. A dark consequence that inflicts harm on others because of Venom's actions. And Venom feels accountable for Carnage, the same way Spidey feels accountable for Venom. That dark tragedy is what fuels all three stories and makes them all so fascinating. Without Carnage, Venom does not undergo his character arc. But the problem is that the movie Let There Be Carnage applied that incorrectly. You see, yeah, Carnage is a foil to Venom in that movie, but the story's different. You see, the whole movie is really about Venom and Eddie's ability to live with one another. So Carnage presents the dark shadow to that core conflict of the film. Carnage and Cletus aren't compatible in the film, the same way Venom and Eddie are. But that's actually inverted from the comics. See, the comics have Carnage as one united entity. Carnage says, I am Carnage, not we are Carnage, unlike how Venom says, we are Venom. But they have to change the conflict because Venom is unified in this continuity. Venom starts as someone not driven by hate, but by essentially being a good guy who is unjustifiably hurt by the system and gets his revenge in that first film. He's not stewing in hate still like he is in the comics when Carnage appears. I think Carnage has a ton of potential if presented as an authentic Carnage, but that would require doing Venom right first, keeping him alive, and culminating in this unification between Spidey and Venom fighting Carnage. The team up is important for all three characters' arcs, but the thing is, that arc benefits Venom specifically most. So again, we're just circling back on characters who have already been explored. And this might actually key into something important. Spidey villains are best when they're reoccurring, because the relationship between characters changes over time. But now let's go over a few who have not appeared at all yet. Who hasn't shown up in the Spider-Man movie with a lot of big ones? Of all Spider-Man's main villains, there is one notable character who has not fought Spider-Man yet in live action, who is arguably one of Spidey's greatest villains, and that's the Kingpin.
It can't be worth the risk.
It's not always about the money, Spider-Man.
Wilson Fisk is more well known today as a Daredevil villain, but he started as a Spider-Man adversary back in Amazing Spider-Man issue 50, the infamous Spider-Man No More comic that inspired Spider-Man 2, the Sam Raimi one. Kingpin was the big bad in the first Spider-Verse movie, proving a great adversary there who actually kills that universe's version of Peter Parker. But this is a guy who needs to be fighting Peter Parker specifically, not Echo, not Hawkeye, not Kate Bishop, Spider-Man, at some point. It sounds like possibly Brand New Day's Tombstone might take the role Kingpin would normally play as like the crime boss who runs everything in the city, kind of like how he did in the Spectacular Spider-Man cartoon. I feel like Kingpin has to fight Spidey, with Daredevil helping of course, because they need to team up sooner than later. Daredevil already showed up in No Way Home, why not have the two of them gang up on Kingpin, both of their most famous mutual adversary. In addition, it appears that Brand New Day isn't just going to bring in the Punisher, it's also going to bring in the Hand. That means two of the big villains from Daredevil Season 2 will now be in Spidey's corner. It just seems like it's destined they're going to cross paths again. But okay, aside from Kingpin, who else is there? Because we know there's a fantastic Kingpin in the MCU. So who haven't we seen yet at all? Well, that's where things get complicated, because they are tiers of iconic villains in the comics for Spider-Man to face. Mr. Negative, for example, is a newer villain who has become very popular, especially thanks to the Insomniac Spider-Man game, where he's one of the big bads. That's probably how you found out about him, because I don't think you read the comics. I mean, some of you probably did. I'll cut that part out. Indeed, Mr. Negative's power set is fascinating to see, the whole negative energy thing, but my problem is this: we're getting Tombstone, and functionally, Miss Negative, Kingpin, and Tombstone all occupy similar niches in Spider-Man's film landscapes. They're boss criminals with impressive skills who ultimately lead a criminal empire. While Miss Negative can bring a lot of visual flair to the movie, what's he bringing thematically to it, necessarily? How many times can we see Spider-Man fight crime bosses and crime lords, again and again from film to film? The biggest in is that Mr. Negative takes over Feast, which is an operation that May Parker opens up in the MCU. That could bring Martin Lee into the fold through that angle. In the Insomniac games, he takes over due to the power vacuum left behind when the Kingpin is arrested. Miss Negative also has ties to the Hood, a character who appeared recently in Ironheart. If the MCU wants to be daring and make Ironheart more ingrained in the MCU, they could try to incorporate the Hood with Mr. Negative in some fashion. But somehow, I don't see them doing that. Miss Negative also has ties with Venom in terms of anti-Venom and all that. They also have ties with Norman Osborn in the Insomniac games. Both could be interesting angles to explore with Mr. Negative, but I just don't see them happening. We're getting Silvermane in Spider-Noir, and that's another crime boss Spidey will face. Are we going to put Hammerhead in next? Well, that'd be fun to see Hammerhead as a gang guy at some point. Maybe I have a gang war movie where it's like Kingpin, Tombstone, Miss Negative, Hammerhead, all fighting together and Spider-Man's caught in the middle. That'd be kind of fun, I guess. Hell, for that matter, bring in the Rose, Wilson Fisk's son, and another iconic villain from the comics. Though how he fits into the MCU is anybody's guess. What about villains outside of the crime lord territory? Let's start with the B-tier guys, since Marvel Studios has shown they're not afraid of bringing in B-rank guys, like the Shocker, who should come back, by the way. Shocker's great. Give him the full suit, by the way, too. Shocker! Or, say, the Tinkerer, or Boomerang and Tarantula. Well, they are characters like Hydro Man. Yes, Hydro Man appeared as an illusion created by Mysterio in Far From Home, but that's not really Hydro Man, that's just smoke and mirrors. Hydro Man can be good muscle for any major villain. He's a minor criminal who Spidey has to stop before the action kicks in, maybe. Or potentially, he's a stalker who might work with Miles Warren, as we saw in the 90s cartoon. That's not a bad adaptation of Hydro Man, by the way. It makes him distinct and interesting. But even then, that's a really cool visual set of powers. A giant water man. Much like how Sandman is interesting, because he's a giant sand guy. Though I think Sandman's the more interesting character, and I do like how when Sandman and Hydro Man face off against each other, it gives Sandman a partial existential crisis, seeing where he could go if he continued down the path of crime. That's always cool. But again, that requires bringing back an old villain. I've said it before and I'll say it again. One of my favorite moments with Sandman is actually not a Spider-Man scene, but rather how Sandman visits the Fantastic Four's thing in the hospital after a fight, packing a 6-pack of beer and cigars, and they just kind of talk a little bit. It's a great little moment that's also accompanied by another scene where the Thing and Sandman just hang out at a bar and just talk. There's a lot of moments with Sandman where he's just a guy off duty. He's an off-duty criminal. He's a punch the clock in on the day job kind of villain. And that's really interesting, and something we haven't really seen explored in the MCU, where everyone has these grand sorts of missions and ideologies. The closest we ever got with this is the Vulture, and the Vulture is one of the best MCU villains, who also should come back, by the way. Interesting how all these options always involve bringing someone back from the past, doesn't it? Also, Molten Man, be kind of cool. I think he's appearing in Spider-Noir also, but, you know, cool guy to have. Another fun B-list character is the Beetle, who has shown up throughout the comics, yet has never had really a starring role, really in any storyline, really. But most interesting, the current Beetle is Janice Lincoln, the daughter of Tombstone, which would tie in with Tombstone if you want to go out to establish him as a reoccurring adversary for Spider-Man. Again, bringing villains back gives them new chances to be reinvented through different contexts, such as, say, Tombstone seeing his daughter go out to be a criminal, superhero, maybe. But with the Beetle, they could just easily do Abner Jenkins, too, the original Beetle, who is a cowardly, practical criminal who works as a good henchman for any number of characters. But he always would split before things got too tough, meaning he was, again, a reoccurring henchman. It's funny how that works out, isn't it? Another fun character to have come back, Carrion, who is most often associated with Carnage and Shriek as part of the delusional crime family. Also Doppleganger, that'd be kind of fun. Carrion's power is if he touches you, he causes your flesh to, like, decay. And Doppleganger is just, well, look at him. He's a crazy version of Spider-Man that looks just like him. A few other guys, Jack-o'-lantern, a cool recurring villain who shows up a lot. I think the most recent Jack-o'-lantern also has ties to Mysterio, who in the comics died, and that's kind of cool. The Gibbon is another fun guy. Puma, another small villain. Will-o'-the-Wisp is fun. Of course, the big B-C-list villain that we have to mention, the Big Wheel. You gotta bring the Big Wheel in. That's one of the most iconic Spider-Man villains.
For this, I left Felicia?
The last big lower-tier villain I want to mention, though, is Sin Eater, who has had numerous appearances over the years. The most interesting one to me, of course, is The Death of Jean DeWolf, which is basically a murder mystery story featuring Peter Parker and Daredevil, following the trail of the Sin Eater after killing, well, you hear the title of it. I just want to see Spider-Man do investigation stuff, because a lot of his stories are him investigating, him doing research, him trying to figure out a crime's path, and it would kind of establish him more as an intelligent character rather than simply a hero who punches things hard. And it really would show his intelligence and how he can adjust to street-level crime the same way Daredevil does, or Jessica Jones does. One big retcon to the Sin Eater storyline as well is that it ties into Venom's origin as well, as Eddie Brock interviews a guy who claimed he was the Sin Eater, only for Peter Parker to catch the real Sin Eater, thus destroying Eddie's reputation in the process. Again, it's funny how often these storylines tie in with established characters, but I digress. And Sin Eater has had numerous iterations over the years, including one recently where he got the power to consume the evil in someone's heart, and that's how Norman Osborn is apparently on the path to redemption in the comics currently. What the fuck are comics anymore? Jesus Christ. Seems like a weird path for Norman Osborn to go down. But again, No Way Home did something similar by expunging the evil Goblin formula out of Willem Dafoe's Goblin. So, who knows? Of course, I am leaving out one key detail. Many people who have seen the new trailer for Brand New Day have noticed it appears that they're going to be adapting the Other storyline. and crossing it over with the Mutant Menace storyline from the 90s animated series. In both stories, Peter Parker mutates into a gigantic human monster, a Spider-Man in the literal sense of the word. In this sense, it appears that the main villain of Brand New Day is not going to be Tombstone or Scorpion, but Peter himself. But this also opens the door to the idea of mutations playing a role in Spidey's story. Another interesting rumor is that we may be getting a team-up movie between Wolverine and Spider-Man, specifically Hugh Jackman's Wolverine and Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man. This may not come to pass, but an X-Men Spidey crossover does have me thinking of a few other options. Personally, I'm still holding out hope that if we do end up making Spider-Man team up with the X-Men, that we see him fight the Juggernaut. That's one of the more iconic fights in the comics. Spider-Man versus the Juggernaut, a character who cannot be stopped. How does Spider-Man with no abilities that can counter the Juggernaut overcome this insurmountable threat? We might get a similar iteration of that idea with the Hulk, being a character Spider-Man has to fight that he has no way of putting down for good. But if he has a fight with the X-Men, or works with the X-Men, he also being the Tri-Sentinel, a character who Loki kind of created actually, to confront Spider-Man after the Acts of Vengeance storyline. Those are the small names we'd like to see. Now, one villain I think we can do without, however, is Morlun. Not Morbius, Morlun. Morlun and the Inheritors are the big bads of the Spider-Verse events, and Morlun is the villain that kicked off JMS's legendary run on Spider-Man, which also tied him in with Ezekiel Sims, who was the villain in Madam Web and kind of a tertiary character in the JMS run. I just think Morlun is kind of boring, personally. He's a good multiversal threat for the Spider heroes along with the Inheritors, but I don't know, he's just a walking tank. In terms of a multiversal threat where they're establishing other Spider-Men, yeah, sure, that's fine. But as a one-off story, it's the Terminator again. I think it's kind of boring unless it's like something interesting. I do like the transformation Peter experiences during their second fight, but it sounds like that transformation into a spider monster might be incorporated into Brand New Day anyway, so who cares? What does Morlun bring to the table that someone else can't bring as well, or more in a more interesting dynamic fashion? If you think that Morlun is necessary for a Spider-Verse story, consider the Spider-Verse trilogy. Look at the villains in that series. None of them are the Inheritors. None of them are Morlun. They're all far more personal threats to Peter and Miles. For that matter, why not have someone like Null be a big universal bad if you really want to have a gigantic overarching multiversal villain in a Spider-Man movie? But okay, of the biggest names that have yet to be adapted, there are a few that stand out. And one of the major ones is the Smythe family. I know Alistair Smythe kind of showed up in Amazing Spider-Man 2, but that's like saying Victor Zsasz appeared in Batman Begins. Like, yeah, he's there, but if you didn't know he was there, you would never know he was there. The Smythe family is most well known for creating the Spider Slayers, a project funded by J. Jonah Jameson to take Spider-Man down for good. This decision has horrible consequences. I know, shocking. Jameson is an antagonist in the Holland-verse Spider-Man films, and seeing him take on a more central role to stopping Spider-Man might help him evolve as a character in interesting ways. Perhaps he sees the harm he does with his actions, and that makes him a better person somewhat. The Smythes, additionally, are fascinating because through creating machines to kill Spider-Man, they end up ruining their own lives. Spencer Smythe, the father, ends up being poisoned by radiation in the process of building these robots, while Alistair, who is paralyzed from the waist down, turns himself into a killer cyborg to fight Peter. Alistair is undoubtedly the more famous of the two Smythes, thanks in part to his role as Kingpin's right-hand man in the 90s cartoon. Still, I think Alistair is a great villain whose life is completely dominated by getting revenge on Spider-Man. It's a great way to iterate and illustrate how obsessive revenge can not only lead to death, but also the degeneration of the soul itself. And as mentioned before, you can tie it to J. Jonah Jameson, or you can tie it to Kingpin. And if you tie it to Kingpin, that would make him a little more distinct than just the guy who's like Tombstone, isn't it? But other big names? Jackal. Miles Warren I mentioned with the Hydra Man stuff before, that's the 90s cartoon plot. Jackal is essentially one of the big puppet masters in the comics. It was Jackal that pitted Punisher against Peter Parker and manipulated a massive crime war in the city in the days following Norman Osborn's passing. Again, tying with what I said before about a gang war, isn't it? Miles was Gwen and Peter's college professor, who became obsessed with Gwen. Disturbingly so, like Frollo from Hunchback of Notre Dame obsessed. So much so, he developed cloning technology to bring Gwen back after Norman Osborn killed her. Ironically, he was later manipulated by Norman Osborn, but I digress. And yes, these events did kick off the Clone Saga. In this process, he made Ben Reilly, Kane, Spider-Side, which no one gives a shit about, but the other two are more important. All products are of the Jackal. And while the Clone Saga is a messy, stupid storyline, it's impossible to deny that Ben and Kane, specifically, are such interesting and fun characters, and I'd love to see them adapted. Hell, I'd love to see the Ben Reilly suit in live action, or the Scarlet Spider suit that Kane wears in live action. It'd be so much fun. The Jackal himself, though, is a deeply disturbing character. I mean, he's an old man obsessed with a college student. It's really fucking weird and perverse and gross, and there's a lot of interesting stuff you can do with that as a villain. I can see the Jackal being a deeply unsettling character in live action. And the crap he does, he goes in these gigantic schemes. They're huge schemes. The Spider Island event, where everyone becomes a spider, essentially, that's the Jackal's storyline. He kicked that off, basically. At least in part. There's more to it than just that, but Jackal's involved in that. That'd be a fun story to adapt too, by the way. He's brought a ton of dead characters back from the grave, which might be a good way to bring back dead villains like Mysterio to the MCU, through cloning. Why not? Mysterio's a great character. We can bring him back for some more. Be fun. Have him come into Sinister Six as a clone. Why not? It's on brand for him. Also, there's a little bit of that whole, the Prestige kind of plot. If you've seen the Prestige, you know what I'm talking about. There's a lot of potential for Jackal as a big villain who can have greater ramifications for the rest of the Spider-Verse, essentially. And bring in some new characters we wouldn't be able to see ordinarily. But the one I'm going to say is the most interesting to me personally is the Hobgoblin. A lot of people are tired of goblins. Yeah, every Spider-Man trilogy has a goblin, but that's because you're overexposed to the Green Goblin. Hobgoblin is a very different beast altogether. The Hobgoblin took the Goblin formula and changed it to remove any influences of madness from the host. This means Hobgoblin has the power of the Green Goblin, maybe even more, but none of the negative drawbacks, meaning he uses his power for personal profit. He's essentially a crime boss with the aesthetics of the Goblin. He's a colder, crueler character who always acts strategically, rationally, and most importantly of all, practically. There are, of course, a number of Hobgoblins, though there are three that stand out. The original and true Hobgoblin, Roderick Kingsley, Jason Macendale, the imitator who became popular in the 90s, and, most intriguingly of all, Ned Leeds. Yeah, that Ned Leeds, who, say it with me now, has already been adapted into the MCU as Peter's guy in the chair, meaning we have an in with Hobgoblin. Now let's get this out of the way right now. Macendale is famous for two things, right? He's the version of Hobgoblin that was adapted into the 90s series that Mark Hamill voiced.
Name's Hobgoblin, and you're right on time for your funeral.
And in the comics, he makes a demonic pact for more power, resulting in the eventual creation of the Demogoblin, a religious fanatical demon counterpart to the Hobgoblin. You would think the demonic version of Hobgoblin would be more evil, but actually no. He actually dies a hero, making Macendale look like the worst monster. Of course, Kingsley comes back and kills Macendale, but, what are you gonna do? The current Ned Leeds has no memory of Peter Parker in the MCU, and probably isn't the kind of character you'd think will betray a human being or become a criminal or anything like that. That's because Ned's turn to villainy started because he was investigating the Hobgoblin, Kingsley specifically, who then kidnapped Leeds, brainwashed him, and used him as essentially a fall guy so Kingsley could continue doing his crimes in the shadows, essentially making Leeds take the blame for the crimes Kingsley committed. Again, cold and practical. So think about this already. A Spider-Man investigation story in lines of the death of Jean DeWolf, where Ned Leeds is the guy being pinned for the crimes committed by Kingsley, and the investigation leads Spider-Man down the path to hunt down the Hobgoblin. Again, Roger Kingsley specifically. To make things more interesting, in the finale, Kingsley can take a page out of Macendale's book and be granted demonic power, potentially. Maybe Kingsley's scheme involves a combination of technology, magic, and other street-level crime, manipulating other lesser villains in New York City, resulting in Spidey having to confront other established characters to get the information he needs to emerge on top. Again, kind of similar to another film that came out, The Batman, where the Batman investigates a crime by the Riddler, and that puts him into conflict with multiple other villains in his rogues gallery in the process. It could be one twist after the other, an investigation storyline. Hobgoblin has potential to challenge Peter, not just physically and emotionally, but also intellectually. However, I think one of the big things that should be done isn't just bring a new villain in, it's bring back old villains. Spider-Man movies have brought old villains back multiple times, and I think they should do it again. I think what you need most of all, out of any villain storyline, is to bring back one particular villain who can bring the rest together around him. Say it with me now. The Spider-Man movies need a new Dr. Otto Octavius. Octavius needs to return in Peter Parker's life, a version of Otto not tied to Tobey Maguire, but to Tom Holland's Spider-Man specifically. And through this, perhaps turning into something similar to what Insomniac Spider-Man does, you bring together some version of the Sinister Six around Doc Ock. Bring back whatever villains are still alive or maybe cloned in Peter's life when this happens. Vulture and Scorpion seem like clear examples here. Figure out what to bring Mysterio back to. Maybe he faked his death. He's an illusionist. He found a way. If Kraven is still around or is brought in between those 2 points, bring him in. Hell, bring Venom in. Why not? He was in the Sinister Six for a brief while too. Bring in Hobgoblin if he's introduced. Or the Shocker. Whoever you want, have him in. I think one of the strengths of Spider-Man isn't necessarily that a new villain shows up every week or every movie, but that his relationships to villains changes over time. His relationship to Otto, Green Goblin, Venom, hell, even going back to Carnage, all of that changes and adapts over time. That's vital because it illustrates how new experiences can shift the dynamic between not just a hero, but their villain in different and intriguing ways. Ultimately, Spider-Man's not a character who introduces new characters all the time, but evolves over time. Look at Magneto in the X-Men films. His arc is incredible because over time, his relationship to characters shifts and changes. You can bring back an old character in new and exciting ways, and intriguing ways. They've already done that in the Raimi films with Harry Osborn, a character I've neglected to mention up until now. Harry evolves and adapts over time, but that's only because the filmmakers had a plan and a direction with the character. Make a plan and a direction with the smaller guys. Bring back Shocker. Bring back Boomerang after this film. Something to show New York City is a living, breathing entity that exists alongside Spider-Man and ages alongside him.
Each of you has a job to do. Your debts will be repaid when we're done. Go!